Now it's our pleasure to welcome Douglas Carswell. He is the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Good to see you there, Douglas. Thanks for coming in.
Hey, Gerard. Great to be on your show again.
So we are smack dab in the middle of the session, and I know this is something that you are constantly tuned into, paying attention to the measures being drafted and providing some input and some influence on what those policies and those bills look like as they are drafted.
We try.
Yeah, the big one, of course, HB 1. We've been talking about it today.
Yep.
That is a measure which has passed the House, been transmitted down the hall to the Mississippi Senate.
Yep.
It would, of course, phase out the individual income tax over a 10-year period in the state, and it has some other provisions for offsets and making the municipalities whole with the reduction of the grocery tax, trying to get more money for roads and bridges. You're familiar with all the provisions. What's your take on that at this point?
We love it. We love the idea of passing a bill in 2025 that will pave the way for the eventual elimination over 10 years of the state income tax. We already see the effect of the previous cut in income tax down to a flat 4%. All this massive inward investment coming into Mississippi is because of those tax cuts a couple of years ago. So this is really, really exciting, really great. There are a couple of caveats, a couple of things about the bill that I would say maybe we need to discuss this. Maybe we should think again. Part of the bill front loads some tax increases so that in 2026, I think I'm right in saying it would raise revenue through fuel tax by about $500 million. And so it slightly front loads some tax raising measures. But, good conservatives, I think, can sit down and make this work. I don't think it's a reason not to do it.
Okay. Yeah, there are some concerns about the fact that the sales tax adjustments, three categories there, the 1.5% additional local tax on non-grocery transactions and reduction of the grocery sales tax on groceries, and then the application of a 5% sales tax on fuel. Those are the three things that would kick in July 26th. But one of the things I think we have to keep in mind to promote as part of this plan, Douglas, is that we already are still reducing the income tax rate by virtue of the measure passed in 2022. So if one were to look at their income taxes for 2024, because everybody's getting their data and their information together to prepare their tax return, income's taxed at 4.7%, 24, 4.4 now, 4. So we got to talk about that.
Kudos to Tate Reeves and to Speaker Gunn for actually doing this. I mean, the effects of this aren't just felt when you fill in your tax returns this year and you see you individually are given a tax break. Yeah. We can see the effects with all this inward investment. It's because of what Reeves and Gunn have done, and they should be, cheered for it. Well done them. It really is. It's making Mississippi part of the Southern success story. But we could go further. Now, here's the thing. Income tax currently raises about $2 billion.
Yep.
Now, we have a surplus of about $700 million. So do the math. How do you get to a stage where you eliminate, in effect, $2 billion of revenue? The only two ways you can do it are to control spending over the long term incrementally and to boost growth. And if you can do that, you can make the math add up. But you can't magically do it away. You can't do it in a year or two. You mustn't rush to do it. But you can pass the legislation now that will allow costs to be controlled incrementally so that costs aren't rising at the same rate that the economy is growing, and you can unleash economic growth. If you do that, we could be a no income tax state in 10 years. That is a phenomenal, phenomenal goal to aim for.
Yeah, so you're right. The actual income tax revenue, looking at the 2025 budget, it's about $2.1 billion and change, just over $2 billion. The original surplus that was projected based on the revenue, sine die revenue estimate and the spending estimate, it came in at about $600 million. However, we are falling below a sine die revenue, actual revenue versus estimate. So I think, and then we got the 2% set aside. So I think when all that's said and done, it's going to put us at about $450 million, which is still significant. What I'd like to see happen, perhaps, is let's go ahead and get something positive going right away. Let's reduce the sales tax on groceries. Affects everybody. Let's make that effective July 1, 2025. I've shared this idea with the Speaker, by the way, just to get people in the mindset of, hey, this is a good plan.
I'm not against that. Just a couple of words of caution.
Okay.
There are some in the Mississippi legislature, believe it or not, who are not too keen on giving you Mississippi listeners back their money.
No
and
doubt.
so what they want to do to try and distract you with this distraction strategy is to play the game of saying, we're going to give you back some of your money on groceries, which seems like a big deal, but isn't. It's a distraction strategy. So we need to be super wary of people in the Mississippi legislature who use talk about grocery tax reductions as a distraction against real tax cuts.
Okay. Yeah, and so I agree with you. I'm just suggesting to modify, amend the bill as is to change the timing of that provision, but still keep everything else in place.
Yeah, I mean, Trey Lamont's super smart. They had this wonderful open day. I think it was in November. There were like 500 people from across Mississippi, and most of them were kind of non-politicos, so ordinary citizens, and they had this fantastic discussion about what to do. I think they'll be hearing this from all sorts of people. They're super, good conservatives can figure this out. They can improve the bill.
Okay.
It needs to be improved. But let's not allow perfection to be the enemy of the good.
Oh, no doubt about it. And in my conversations with the Speaker, he said, yeah, we got a long way to go, as you know, and keep the ideas coming. And I think you're well aware the final form of the bill will look somewhat different than what is passed the House, and that's the way the lawmaking works.
Yeah, when Reagan passed his great tax reform proposals, the end product was different to how it started.
Oh, no doubt.
And we've got our own version of Reagan, I think, in the House now.
Yeah, good deal. So let's talk about taxes at the federal level, and you know where I'm going with that. We got the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the so-called Trump tax cuts passed in 2017. The individual provisions of that law scheduled to sunset at the end of this year. It means if we don't either renew or extend, and my preference, make them permanent, then everybody's taxes are going up effective January 26th. In less than a year, my concern, Douglas, is that the 435 in the House and the 100 in the Senate, even with Republican majorities, are not going to get their act together and get this done in a short period of time.
It's wafer thin, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really
Can't
is.
lose a single vote in the House of Republicans.
And I think the Senate is looking a bit like the House was, on a knife edge. I hear rumors that there might be some people who join the Republicans, but the Republicans in the U.S. Capitol have this extraordinary ability to shoot themselves in the foot. So let's wait and see. But people don't want their taxes going up. We need to make sure that they get their act together. But fundamentally, the U.S. government is heading towards a fiscal crisis unless it addresses its overspending. And, there's this talk about Musk and Doge and reducing the size of government spending. That has to be done. That absolutely has to be done. If that doesn't happen, America will, I'm afraid, end up like Argentina was over a period of 20, 30 years of basically devaluing its currency and defaulting on its debt. And America can't allow that to happen.
Yeah, which led to, as you well know, outrageous, we're talking multi-digit inflation.
And it hammered the middle class. The middle class in Argentina was decimated.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah. So, and as you well know, deficit spending is what leads to inflation. It's what devalues the dollar because we have to print more money to keep up with the debt.
The biggest threat to U.S. power today is not China. It is not Russia. It is not Islamism. The biggest threat to U.S. power today is the national debt because that is what historically always destroys great powers. And Musk understands this. We've got to get control of federal spending.
Hopefully we'll get some serious work and serious action there. You've likely seen a lot of the proposals and a lot of the discoveries they have made on some of the crazy spending that's going on. My concern, of course, is that there's not as much focus on what I believe are the true drivers of our deficits and thus our debt, and that's the mandatory programs of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. There's a lot of wasteful spending in all three of those programs. So beyond that, even cutting the waste, you're still dealing with automatic increases just because the cost of running those programs goes up.
A fundamental part of the problem is until the 1930s, there was basically a single unified committee in the House that decided the budget.
Yeah.
What's happened is that different committees, I mean, if you go out to a restaurant and everyone can run up a bit of the bill and not have to be responsible for it, what
That's
happens? You've got to reform the way Congress sets the budget. You've got to have a unified committee that once again controls government spending.
Man, that'd be a sea change of the way we operate now, no doubt. If you can hang around, we keep talking.
Love to.
We've got Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy in the Element Wealth Studio, coming right back. We're visiting with Douglas Carswell. He is the President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. So just trying to size up the objections to HB 1, the bill from the House, Mississippi House, that would eliminate the income tax. Retired folks in the state of Mississippi are particularly concerned because they don't currently pay income taxes. Retirement income, specifically in Mississippi, is exempt from taxation. They see these other adjustments in sales taxes as generally increasing their taxes. What do you say to them, to the retired people? How do you sell it to them?
I think the biggest taxation that retired people in Mississippi have been forced to pay over the past few years is called inflation. That is a tax on ordinary people. When the value of the dollar declines, you go into a grocery store. It's not even the tax on the groceries that really clobbers you. It's the fact that thanks to Joe Biden's economics, you've been taxed through inflation.
Sure.
So there is a real problem here. But look, I think you need to recognize that if we want to have a prosperous state, you need to shift the burden of taxation away from taxing work onto taxing other things, those other things being maybe consumption or property or whatever it is. And that means you're going to have to cut taxes on income. If you don't have an income, you're not going to be as prime a beneficiary of that as a family on income. But I would hope that many people who aren't going to benefit from cuts in the income tax because they themselves don't have an income would at least recognize it's helpful to their children and their grandchildren who are at the stage they were at 20, 30 years ago. So, I mean, I think this is good for Mississippi overall. But, yeah, I recognize that the benefits of this will not be evenly distributed, and I think we need to be honest about that.
Okay. All right. So there's more, and I think that's the way, honestly, to describe it and define it. It is you have to look at the more holistic benefit value but people by human nature focused on what does it mean to them.
Of course, and they're legitimate and right to do that.
Sure, absolutely. All right, let's turn our attention to another high-profile policy issue in the state of Mississippi, and that's education choice, school freedom.
This is actually our number one issue, and I am super excited to see a couple of really interesting bills. Jansen Owen has a wonderful bill which would give people, in effect, public-to-public school choice. It means that every family in Mississippi could have the choices that, as of last year, active military service families could. If you're in a public school and you want to switch to a different public school, provided there's capacity in that school, you can make the move. I think it's wonderful. I think it's great. Really exciting. There's also a great bill by Rob Robertson, the chairman of the Education Committee we're hugely excited about, HB 1433. This would allow a limited form of public to private school choice. Sadly, it would only be in DNF-rated districts. But basically, if you're in a DNF-rated district and you weren't happy with your public school, you could take a portion of the overall funding to a private school. We think that would be super, super exciting. So
we interviewed the lieutenant governor a couple of weeks ago, and we discussed this very issue. And, you know, he's not necessarily a huge fan, I think is the way to put it, of any sort of school choice policy. And this is something I've been working with him on for over a decade now, honestly. Here's a question. I haven't read either of those bills, but I knew they were coming. I haven't dug into them yet. DNF-rated districts or schools?
I believe it's districts.
There are only 3.
Well, it's DNF rated at some point in the past 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's my understanding. Now, but even then, you're right. It's
in arrears.
It's not nearly widely. It's not nearly extensive enough. I get that. But look, we've been pushing, as you said, for this for years. We've got nowhere. This would be a great step forward if we could do it.
Because it's he sort of interchanged district and school in our discussion. I also interviewed Senator David Blunt, the Democrat, that it pretty much opposes most school choice provisions.
You mean the senator who sent his own kids to private school? I always find it really rich
personally attended private school.
When people who send their own kids to private school come out against school choice. I think America and Mississippi deserve to know. I mean, there's a word for that. It's called hypocrisy, and I think it needs to be called out, Gerard.
He I'm pretty sure, is also a graduate of Jackson Preparatory School, if I'm not mistaken.
A wonderful school.
Yes.
I want every family in Mississippi to have the opportunity to choose a school as good as Jackson Prep.
Sure. So the point I'm making is I have concerns, I suspect you do as well, about the methodology used in rating our schools.
Yeah.
I don't think it is necessarily an accurate reflection of the performance of the schools. We only have two Fs and one D.
It has all the efficacy of Soviet tractor production targets. These are meaningless bureaucratic statistics.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a difference, and that's why I'm glad you cleared that up. I haven't read the legislation yet proposed by Representative Robertson, drafted by him, but there is a difference between the school and the district. So, for example, Jackson Public Schools, right nearby here, a number of schools, I think the biggest school district in the state, I think it's presently rated at the district level as a C, but there are F schools within the district.
Yeah.
So if it's restricted to the district rating, that's a different situation than if it's at the school level.
Totally. It's far from the perfect bill, but it would be a hugely significant step forward. Look, I think a really important thing to do is draft legislation that reassures people that school choice is not going to mean floods of the wrong kids coming into their neighborhood. So I would like to see really tough safeguards so that the school district defines capacity. I've heard the Lieutenant Governor say that, and I think he's absolutely right to say that. I would love to see the legislation amended to make sure that that is addressed. I think it's also really important that the schools have the power to exclude children on the basis of a history of disciplinary problems. You've got to give families in Madison and Clinton and DeSoto County absolute assurance that school choice is not going to mean that the quality of their good districts is eroded. This is about changing what isn't working in failing school districts, not exporting those problems into what is working.
Okay, because you're well aware of that. That's a common and widespread objection.
And people need to be able to have the conversation openly and honestly, and we need to address it. It's a legitimate concern, and people need to be able to articulate those fears and have those addressed in legislation. We need to make sure that school choice does not mean the wrong kids flood into successful school districts, and we're determined to make sure that happens.
You've looked at the Arkansas model, I'm sure, and so they kind of phased it in where there was a limit on the number of ESAs, essentially. And I think last year it was like 14%, as I recall. And this year it's wide open. Everybody that has a student that is of that age receives a voucher or an ESA in some amount, even those whose children have historically and currently attending private school. Is that something you'd like to see happen in Mississippi? Universal school choice, as you know, is how that's referred to.
Eventually, absolutely. I mean, you talked about trying to persuade some politicians about school choice over the previous years. The real game changer is Mississippi is now surrounded on three sides by school choice states.
That's right.
You've got Arkansas. Alabama just launched their school choice program and opened it up and was way oversubscribed. In fact, I think on the opening day, their website crashed. It was so popular. Louisiana, a little behind. They've only just passed the legislation, but they're going to allow school choice. If you were to do something similar in Mississippi, it would be a game changer. It would be an absolute game changer. You need, ultimately, public to private school choice. But let's start with public to public school choice and this pilot program in DNF-rated districts. Let's take the win. Let's pass this legislation, and let's reassure people that it's not going to be the end of the world. It's going to improve public education in Mississippi where it needs to be improved. It's not going to take away what's good and what works.
And that's something we really do need to clarify, I believe, Douglas, is that to the opponents of school choice, there's no intention on the part of school choice proponents to harm anything that's working.
Of course. I mean, there are two opponents of school choice. There are those who have legitimate concerns. They look at their wonderful school district, they look at the fact they pay local taxes, and they want reassurance that their taxes aren't going to be misused, that they're not going to get lots of kids from outside coming into their school district. And those legitimate concerns need to be addressed. Then I'm afraid to say there are the vested interests, the people who frankly like the fact that school superintendents have large salaries,
No doubt
often
about
higher
it.
than the governor. And we need to differentiate between legitimate concern, often from parents who need reassurance, and those who frankly want to carry on the bureaucratic bondoodle we've got at the moment. And we need to recognise there are legitimate concerns about school choice we need to address, and there are also those frankly who are opposed to it because, frankly, they're on the same side as Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And of course, Joe Biden is strongly supported by the teachers' unions, and which are much more powerful in other parts of the country than they are here. But they have very outspoken opponents of this because it interferes with their little gig, and they don't want that. But I think before we go, I think we've got a good chance of getting the legislation you talked about, the public-to-public, with some degree of restrictions on capacity, disciplinary, and then the rating of the school. I think we got a chance of getting that through the Senate as well.
I'm really optimistic. There are good people in the Senate who I think are coming around.
I think so, too. Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of Mississippi Center for Public Policy, has been our guest. Always good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.